see whiskey, smell whiskey, taste whiskey, but more importantly, think whiskey. Welcome to another episode of Erik Wait Whiskey Studies, and in this video I'm going to do a review of the Teeling single grain Irish whiskey. This has been a really interesting whiskey. It's probably only the third grain whiskey that I have reviewed on my channel. I've had other whiskeys, off camera. I've done another single grain. I've done a blended grain whiskey. So I don't have a huge experience with grain whiskeys, but I have found this one to be really thought provocative. I like the aromas, I like the flavors, but it's been really interesting because every time I go back to the bottle, back to the glass, it seems like I get something different, or it seems like the aromas and the flavors, which I had experienced before, are yet coming to me in a different way. So it's been a whiskey which I'm, almost halfway through it, has really developed and continues to develop, but I'd say even more than a lot of other whiskeys. So before I give you my review of this whiskey, here are my notes. The Teeling single grain Irish whiskey is made from 95% corn, 5% barley. It is triple distilled, aged in ex-bourbon cask, then finished in French oak ex-California Cabernet Sauvignon cask from Rombauer Winery, Frank Family Vineyards, Colgan Cellars in the Napa Valley. It is bottled at 46% alcohol by volume. It is non-chill filtered and sells for only $35 in my neighborhood. So it's primarily corn. That 5% is used in order to get the enzymes that are needed to convert starch to sugar. So we always have a little bit of malt in there. There are some other reviewers and articles and so forth that say this is, like an Irish version of a bourbon. It's absolutely nothing like a bourbon. Yes, bourbon is made from at least 51% corn, but the casking is completely different. Bourbon has to have, a new oak. This isn't made from new oak. So the aromas and flavors are really quite different. However, if there is something that it does have in common with the bourbon, I would say it's probably closer to the texture, and there's a distinctive sweetness to the whiskey. This is a whiskey that has really developed a lot. But usually, when I try a whiskey, it might be muted, but then the aromas and flavors that are there simply become more apparent and more voluminous as I work my way through the whiskey. But this is one in which different times that I've come back to it, certain notes are more prominent than others, and the next time I come back to it, other aromas to come back to. And then I tried the whiskey again, and it's kind of gone back this way, and then it's kind of gone back this way. It's really had a really interesting ride as I work my way through the bottle. Now, when you review wines, when you review whiskeys, and you give your perception of it, really it should be based on not just your personal preferences, but also in comparison to other whiskeys in that particular category. So over the last over 20 years, I've probably had thousands and thousands and thousands of bottles of Cabernet Sauvignon. I would say mostly from California and Bordeaux, but of course also from Australia, from Chile, and South Africa, and other countries. But most of the wines I have in my cellar, I have a few, a couple hundred bottles of Cabernet Sauvignon. It's going to be mostly Napa Valley and Bordeaux. So when I make a judgment call on a Cabernet Sauvignon, based on years of experience and trying different vintages and so forth. So the same thing goes for whiskeys as well, which makes this a little bit challenging because I don't have as much of, let's say, in-depth and breadth of experience with different grain whiskeys. So most of what I'm going to go by is going to be based on personal preferences, as well as what I think is just the structure and overall character of this particular whiskey. So I'm really looking at it as the whiskey as it is, rather than within the particular category, right? So when you're looking at bourbons, you're looking at not just that particular individual bourbon, you're looking at the context, a broader context of other bourbons. Likewise with a peated whiskey, say from Islay, you don't look at it just that particular bottle, but in comparison, contrast, even if you don't mention the contrast with other whiskeys in a video, in your mind, you're thinking about other whiskeys from Islay, peated whiskeys from Islay, and comparing it with other peated whiskeys. So usually, what I would do is not only just judge this whiskey and seek to understand this whiskey on its own, but also in comparison to other grain whiskeys. Well, I don't have that particular opportunity. But even if I did, even if I had more experience with other grain whiskeys, this is really unique due to the casking that they've used. You would have to compare it in the context of other grain whiskeys that have also been aged or finished in Cabernet Sauvignon casks, right? In order to get like versus like, all right? Now, I've done a lot of comparison videos. If I were to try to do a comparison video with this with another whiskey, I couldn't find another one. It's a really unique whiskey with a very distinctive and unique character, and I really like it. So on the nose, it has you can't smell sugar, right? Not necessarily, and yet there's sort of a candy-like smell to it. There's sort of a light sort of candy corn character to it. There's definitely a vanilla, lighter cinnamon. But the Cabernet Sauvignon, and I'm going to say the Cabernet Sauvignon comes around more and more as you work your way through, is really nice. So you get some blackberry, black currant notes, but there's also this like fudge character. Now you can have chocolate, you can have dark chocolate and light chocolate. I really get fudge on this whiskey. It actually has a slight honeysuckle floral note as well. All right, on the palate. Sweet on entry. Get like caramelized apples and pears, loads of vanilla. Then about halfway to the mid palate, I get the black fruit notes, but it's more like a black currant. If you ever have now we don't eat a lot of currants here in the United States, so if you ever have a croissant with dried black currants on it, which I've had, and you sort of pick off, a little currant off the croissant, so it's been baked, and you taste that, that's what I get. So it's more of a dried black currant. We have a store here in my neighborhood in California. You might have one as well, called Trader Joe's. You can go to the fruit and nut section and you can buy dried fruits. I have bought dried black currants. I like to put them in oatmeal or do some baking with them. I get that dried black currant note, particularly on the back end. That is a hallmark of Cabernet Sauvignon. So there is this really nice, rich red wine character showing up on the back end. There's that fudge character. And then here's what's really interesting. It starts off sweet on the front end. And there's almost like a slight, it's not it's not dramatic. There's a slight dryness, almost like a slight tannic structure on the back end, as if the Cabernet Sauvignon is really making its presence known. Now, what is tannin? You don't talk about tannins when we're talking about whiskeys. Tannin is basically it's an astringency that causes a slight dryness, but in red wines, it gives a wine a backbone rather than being sort of flabby. It gives a nice structure to particularly a red wine. To the wine, and so I really like that. So I like it. It starts off sort of a light honey sweet, transitions into like a more black fruit note, more of like a dried black currant, and then on the back end, I get more of a sort of a rich fudge character, and then it finishes dry. Now, it sounds strange to talk about something being dry. You want a liquid, but you mean it's non-sweet. So there's a non-candy sweetness to the back end, or getting in actually a little bit more dry, like a dry red wine. I really like the development of this whiskey. If you saw my review of the small batch, it's about 45 minutes long. It's probably the longest video I've ever shot. I talked about how I review whiskeys. Structure, the development of a whiskey for me is really important. I like an evolution. I like a change. I like a whiskey that really grabs my attention and makes me think. And this whiskey does that. It's unique. It's very different from anything I've ever had. So it's hard to judge it on that basis because I don't have anything else really I can compare it to. There's no other whiskey that comes to my mind that is similar to this. But on its own, I like its development. I like the sweetness. I like the richness. And I like the way it finishes. I really, really like this whiskey, and it's only 35 bucks. But I also know I'm a little bit of a whiskey nerd. I'm a little bit of a whiskey geek. I also know, I have perhaps a unique background because coming from the wine background, perhaps I'm bringing that into this, which, affects my perception of the whiskey. There is a subjective, personal part of how we look at whiskeys and how we appreciate whiskeys. And I think some of my wine background, and particularly my love for the Napa Valley. I've been to 136 wineries in the Napa Valley. In fact, I've been to Rumbauer and Frank family vineyards. I haven't been to Colgan. That's only out of the three that the casks are coming from that I haven't been to. But I think this really is a lovely whiskey. It's a really nice whiskey. It's a sweet and rich whiskey, and I think it really, really is thought provocative. I have had to spend probably more time just thinking, analyzing this whiskey and trying to understand it more than I have than any other whiskey that I've had in a really long time. Now, what am I giving in terms of a score? The score, I said this before in a previous video, a score is not as important as the overall impression of the character of this whiskey. I'm going to give this a solid 90 points. A solid 90 points. I really, really like this whiskey. And for 35 bucks, I think it's really, really, really a delicious whiskey and a great buy. Really like this whiskey. Now, is it going to be for everyone? Maybe not. Maybe not. If you are a wine geek, if you like wine finishes, red wine finishes, I think you're going to like this whiskey. Alrighty, so that's it for this review. If you like watching my videos, but you've not yet subscribed, I would greatly appreciate it if you would subscribe, ring the bell to be notified when I go live or post a new video. And if you are one of my Patreons, I want to thank you very much for joining my little group. Alright, until next time, cheers.